So hello, I'm Tara. So a little bit about me. We heard a little bit. So I'm a program manager at Mixer, Microsoft's live streaming service. I handle things in the international search area, but I'm also the head of our accessibility efforts there. I'm the Gaming for Everyone, Gaming with Disability Community Lead, which is a really long title, but at Xbox we have a program called G for E, Gaming for Everyone, where we have all sorts of underrepresented groups, and we're championing making more inclusive products and getting those communities more involved with gaming. And for gaming and disability, I'm the community lead. And I'm also the GA Conf, which is short for Game Accessibility Conference, not saying I'm original, co-director and co-founder. So if any of you guys like what you hear today, want to do a deep dive, the Monday before GDC in San Francisco is GA Conf, the only full conference dedicated to game accessibility and gamers with disabilities. And I've been in the industry for a while. I've been in for over 10 years now, and I've been everywhere. PlayStation, Turtle Rock, Ready at Dawn, Irrational, Volition, and I've been doing game accessibility work for years. I also used to be the director of the IGDA Game Accessibility SIG, and I was one of the first staff writer for Able Gamers. If you follow game accessibility at all, you would have heard of them. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about game accessibility. So we're going to be covering three things today because most people need a primer on accessibility and disability before I can even start telling them what they need to do in their games. So today we're going to talk about literally what is a disability, how big the disabled gaming audience is, and then finally, now that you know all those, you're invested, how do you start making your games more accessible? So what is a disability? I bet if we went through and asked people in this room, you guys would all probably come up with different answers. So we're gonna go through an exercise. This is Zach Anner, who number one is hysterical. If you're not already watching his stuff on YouTube or reading his book, you should go and do that. All right. Now, if I were to ask people in this room, what is Zach Anner's disability? There's probably a few of you that initially think, oh, he has cerebral palsy. That is correct. He does indeed have cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is a medical condition, not a disability. All right, what's your second guess? It's the wheelchair, isn't it? It's the wheelchair. That's his disability. You're wrong again. A wheelchair is actually an amazing piece of assistive technology. He can do more things now because of his wheelchair. So it's not the wheelchair. So what is it? Well, in this case, he's actually not disabled. His goal here was to go down this red carpet and look fabulous. He's doing that. What being disabled really is a mismatch between a person and their environment. So a person using a wheelchair isn't disabled until they come to a building that only has stairs. And this isn't just some like feel-good thing that I'm telling you right now. This is actually how the World Health Organization defines a disability. It's a mismatch between what a person can do and their environment. Now I know if you start thinking about the applications in games, that's really deep, because that means that if someone can't play your title because of a choice you've made someone disabled. And that is like emotionally hard to deal with. But I also know that not everyone in here has emotions. Maybe you're some weird capitalist robot and you just need the numbers. That's fine, I'm here for you too. So if you think about the gaming world, we can just start with the world. So there are 7.6 billion people in the world. We know that about 4 billion of those people are online somehow. And we know about 2 billion of them are gamers. And if you do the math, with about even 1 in 5 Americans having a disability, that means there's only over 250 million gamers with disabilities. That is a huge market. Now, the other thing about that statistic is that actually isn't fully inclusive. Things that like the World Health Organization defines as disabilities wouldn't actually match up with things that could prevent you from playing a game well. So colorblindness, not considered a disability. I'm sure we've all heard stories of someone who was colorblind who couldn't play a video game. Low reading age. It's something like 11% of adults in the US have a reading age of a 4th grade level. They're gonna come to issues with your game. And that also doesn't include stuff like temporary or situational impairments. I mean, I know that if I'm trying to take a mobile device like my Switch somewhere and I forget my headphones, it's very rude to turn your sound on in public. I've just lost the ability to hear all audio. Hope the game has good visual cues, because if it doesn't, now I can't play. And the other thing to realize is that gamers with disabilities are actually overrepresented versus the normal population. So earlier I said about 1 in 5 Americans have a disability. PopCap actually did a survey years ago. So measuring the people who are playing their games, so casual market, they had a definition of what they considered to be a person or a gamer with a disability. And they found with the general population, it was 15.1% met their criteria. But when they surveyed their users, people actually playing their games, they found that it was 20.5%. So people with disabilities are overrepresented in the gaming space compared to the average population. And if that doesn't make you want to go for them, these guys are great customers. So gamers with disabilities, because they get more benefits from gaming, I mean everything from mood improvement to pain management to being able to experience new social outlets that they couldn't in the physical world, they will play your game for more hours per week. They will have longer sessions when they play. They're more likely to refer their friends because now that they found something they can play, they're going to tell everyone to come play with them. And they're more likely to buy additional content from the same developer or publisher if they know they have a proven track record for accessibility. So they're repeat customers. So these guys are, business-wise, just a good group to invest in. You want them. And the other thing is when you're designing for this group, it makes a better product overall. But you don't have to listen to me. You can listen to people like Phil Spencer. The results of inclusive design for accessibility always leads to a better product for everyone. Now, you may be thinking, that's really cool. Yeah, I'm totally sold, Tera. I'm ready. You hit me in the feels. You hit me with the numbers. What do we do next? Well, let's start thinking about inclusive design. So that's something that we actually champion at Microsoft, and we actually have a publicly available toolkit that you can download that is meant for all tech, but it definitely applies to games. So what are the principles of inclusive design? So you're going to recognize exclusion. That's step number 1. You're going to look at your product and analyze where you've done something where someone may not be able to engage now. You're then going to learn from diversity because you're seeing so many different types of people. You're going to apply that to your product. And then you're going to do something like solve for one, extend to many, which basically means if you see a problem for one group, you'll create a solution that other groups will use. So an example of this is Xbox's Copilot. With Copilot, you can have 2 controller inputs register as 1 on the Xbox. That feature was specifically designed for gamers with disabilities who are using multiple controllers, like they were physically on their own, hardwiring 2 controllers together. We're like, wow, if you do that, you've just voided your warranty. If it breaks, you have to get a soldering iron. We can make that easier. We solve that for them. What are the side benefits? We now have tons of parents playing games with their children. Playing a racing game and the parent will steer, but the child would use gas and brake. We're starting to see some people in esports realizing that they can hook up Copilot and reload by tapping their foot and never having to take their thumb off the thumbstick, making their reload time faster. So that's an example of we solved a very specific problem for one group, now it's extending to many. Now, I want to tell you guys a story, and this is one of my favorite stories. So in the 1940s, the US military had a cockpit, and there was one cockpit, nothing was adjustable, and there was a really high rate of non-combat related plane crashes. So people just crashing their plane when no one was shooting at them. And all of the pilots were like, guys, it is your plane. Your plane is broken. This is not our fault. And then all of the mechanical engineers were like, no, we have looked at our plane. Our plane is fine. Our plane is working exactly as we intended it to. Obviously, there was some sort of mismatch. There was some sort of problem. So how did they get this original cockpit in the first place? Well, the US military had rounded up a bunch of people and measured them in 10 different places and then took the averages of these measurements, height, arm length, inseam, all of this stuff, and then built around the average. So how could it have been so bad? They built it for this average person. Well, after they started having all these issues, they did a second study. So they rounded up 4,000 pilots. And you have to remember, pilots are already, especially in the 1940s, not a diverse group. All of them are going to be white men with a certain age range, with a certain level of eyesight, certain height, certain skill level, probably all white because it was the 40s. You know, not a diverse group of people. Took 4,000 of them, measured them in the 10 different places, got their numbers again. Okay, based on these 4,000 people, this is the average pilot. Now, after they got the numbers for the average pilot, the guy running the study was like, okay, I'm gonna see who in this group fits my average pilot numbers. And what they found was out of the 4,000 people they measured, not one of them hit all 10 points for the average pilot, meaning that this cockpit that they had just designed was designed for literally no one. No one hit the measurements that they had done. So if you think about that, if they could take a group of white guys of the same height, of the same body shape, of all of that stuff, and still not be able to make something that worked for everyone, what does that mean for video games? If you're trying to design for your average player, you're designing for no one because it's not a real thing. Gaming is a hugely diverse group. Young people, old people, people who use the standard controller, people using specialty controllers, heights, weights, everything. So you gotta be diverse. And now you're thinking, great, Tara, that's like amazing philosophical things. I have no idea how to apply that. I like where you're going though. Don't worry, I got this for you still. Sorry, I have a timer running to make sure that I don't go over. There we go. All right, so how are you gonna be successful on your next title? You are going to start planning early. Maybe you're planning literally right now. And this is what you're gonna do. You're going to evaluate and solve. So when you're working on a game, there are basically 3 areas that you're going to need to evaluate for accessibility. So you need to think about receiving info. How are people receiving information about your title? So what are they seeing and what are they hearing? And the more important question, what happens if they can't see or hear what you're sharing with them? The next one is going to be processing and determining a response. So before I mentioned that a low reading age can be really common in the US, if someone reads pretty slowly and you're advancing things really quickly for them, how are they gonna know what to do? And then the last one is providing input. If someone has to physically use a controller or enter a verbal command, how are they going to do that? And then what happens if they don't use it the same way you do? And to kind of put this in more perspective, because I know it's kind of high level, I've got some actual examples. So for visual and auditory, you're gonna think about low vision, colorblind, blind, hard of hearing or deaf. You know, if they have some sort of issue receiving that information. For cognitive, that's talking about like autism, ADHD, sensory processing. And for motor and speech examples, what if someone's quadriplegic and using a special controller setup? Maybe they have an amputation, they only have one hand. Maybe they've had a stroke and can only use certain fingers. If you have a game that requires a lot of speech commands or even multiplayer communication, what if they have a stutter, or maybe they're just nonverbal? You know, what are you going to offer to them? Now, I know that that's all like great, but a lot of people just want to be told like, hey, like tell me things I can do. So this is what I like to call Tera's totally unofficial list of stuff, and you aren't required to do any of these by anyone, but you really, really should. And so what I'm gonna talk about are subtitles. And these are basically my pain points. I've been using some of these slides for like 10 years, because as an industry, we're still struggling. Subtitles, controls, colorblind support, documentation, and probably some other stuff. Okay, we're gonna start at the beginning. We're going back to basics, Christina Aguilera style. That's a lie, I'm not gonna sing for you. But we really do need to start at the beginning. The video game industry is far behind other parts of tech in accessibility. Even though right now we have a lot of great stuff happening, between the Special Olympics and the Xbox Adaptive Controller, as a whole, we're still really bad. Which is why I want to start with subtitles. All I'm really talking about here are people speaking. On-screen text for all speech in-game. If you have information that someone is saying that you want the player to receive, if you don't have text for it, there are going to be people who don't get it. Whether they're deaf, hard of hearing, they have a roommate or baby in the next room that they're trying to not wake up, so they have it turned down low. They need that information. Important sounds. How many people played Resident Evil 2, the remake? I'm gonna pretend it was all of you. You guys should go play that right now. They just released 3 free DLCs if you like speedrunning. One of the things that happens in Resident Evil 2 is you know that the tyrant, Mr. X, is coming because you hear loud footsteps. That's how you know he's there. If you can't hear the footsteps, you don't know that he's there, you don't know that you should GTFO, right? So how are you going to share that information? And I want to be clear, I'm not just talking about pre-rendered cinematics. The video games are also really, really bad about like having a beautiful scene and then you cut into gameplay where there's still important story information happening and it's just not subtitled. The other thing I really want to enforce is subtitles are not just used by people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So a few years ago, CNET did this survey and they found that 79% of their players were turning on subtitles. More recently, for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Ubisoft actually shared the numbers, and they had 70% of their users turning on subtitles. I'm pretty sure that 70% of people playing Assassin's Creed are not deaf or hard of hearing. This is something that people will use, so you need to invest in it. Don't make subtitles a tacked-on feature. And don't reinvent the wheel. Subtitles have been around for a long time in other media. We already know what's good. People have these grand ideas and they're trying to improve, but maybe we should just start with literally the basics first. So, what are common mistakes we see in video games? There's too much text, literally, paragraph on the screen. Nobody got time for that. Too much. Hard to read font and or color. So people will have just colors that make it really hard to see. No info on who's talking. That's the other one. So let's say that I'm getting a radio call from someone and that shows up on my screen. If I don't label it and I can't see them, or if someone's talking off screen, if I can't hear them, how do I know who they are? It gets really bad if you're having like a radio situation in which multiple people are talking to you. You just have no idea who it is. And then again, just not subtitling everything that's important. I know this is a blurry screenshot, but it's one of my favorite examples because it breaks all of the rules in one go. So this is this is the original Destiny. So what we have here is yellow text that's a paragraph, small, on Venus, which is a yellow planet, that is overlapping with not one, but 2 different UI elements. My screenshot was kind of bad, but there was also something up, like showing up under Guardians. If you are deaf and you are trying to play, and this is what you have to work with, how good do you think your experience is? Probably not great. Now, how do you make them better? If you go forward, this is literally the bare minimum. Have them centered at the bottom of the screen. People try to move them other places. The reason you put them at the center bottom of the screen is it reduces the amount of time it takes for your eye to travel from gameplay to the subtitles and back. Less eye movement, less eye strain, they enjoy more gameplay. Don't have more than 3 lines at a time. If you can do 2, great. More text that you add means that people will spend more time reading and less time taking in information from the game. Have spoken text, like I'm saying words, in mixed case. So it's actually scientifically proven that people read faster in mixed case because their brain processes the word as a whole rather than having to look at each letter to process it. So to have people read your subtitles faster and get back to gameplay, have it in mixed case. And then also use a sans serif font. I know a lot of times people are like, oh, but I have this elegant video game and it's so elegant and it's also Victorian style, so I need an elegant Victorian font. No, you don't. That shit's hard to read. You want people to read it. That hand gesture, whatever that means. And the other thing that I really want to stress is, as game developers, we all sit this far from our screen, right? Well, it looks good right there. Cool. What happens when you put it on at least a 1080p TV and you sit 6 feet back? That thing that looks fine here is unreadable from a 6-foot or 10-foot experience. And we need to remember that. So as we're working, you need to make your subtitles at least 46 pixels tall at 1080p. I don't know what the number is for 4K, but someone in here probably knows how to use the internet better than I do. I'm sure someone has figured it out, probably the BBC. And I want to reiterate that by doing these things, that's not a great experience. You've just got a car that's street legal. How many of us love driving street legal cars? No, a lot of us probably like air conditioning, a radio, you know, a working cup holder, right? So you need to do extra. Be sure to make it easy to read. If possible, make it contrast with the background. One of the things you saw with Destiny is yellow is not a bad subtitle color. Yellow on yellow is terrible. What if you just added a letterboxing or a backdrop behind it to make sure that it contrasts? This is an example of Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is actually a great franchise in terms for subtitles. So they have the option to both change the color for speakers. So like Lara will always have a teal color to her subtitles, making it even faster for you to recognize who's talking. And you can turn that letterbox fully on, or have it slightly opaque, or not have it there at all. And anything that you can do, like allowing people to change the size or anything else, all of that will make it better. So once you have your street legal car, think about all of the add-ons and extras, the options that you could give the user to make it a better experience. And again, I want to reinforce labeling your speaker. There are so many instances, and I know I've already said this, but it's so important I'm saying it again. There's so many instances in games where someone is talking and we have no idea who it is. Just label your speaker. And I also want to mention systemic VO. I know I'm talking a lot about subtitles because this is one of the worst places we are in the industry. So as you're happening in game, how many times are you playing and you realize that you need to do something because an NPC has said something like reloading, right? That stuff is also not subtitled and has gameplay implications. So who here has played Overwatch? Great. Who here from this screenshot can tell me what character is using their ultimate ability? Trick question, you can't, right? And how important is it to know what hero in Overwatch is using their ultimate ability? What you do depends greatly on who's using their ultimate. How you're going to respond to Hanzo's dragon is different than how you're going to respond to a Bastion. But none of that, because it's systemic VO, is subtitled, which means that gamers who can't hear are losing information and therefore will be actively worse at the game, because they can't plan when the rest of us can. So if you're working on this, I'm not going to go into much. You may be like, Tera, oh, you have the most talkative game in the world and I have too many sounds. Just make a priority queue. I'm sure you know what's important. You know, anything that is must not miss, rank it a 1. You know, as you go through, just kind of think of like, yeah, oh, this is really important, level 1, it starts playing. Maybe you have a less important sound start, but your first one isn't done yet. That's fine, you can skip it. Just make sure that the players get the most important information. Because like I said, a lot of times they don't. And this is a really important one, and you're probably like, Tera, is this true that there are games that don't let you turn on subtitles before the first cinematic starts? Yes, all the time. This actually just happened when Far Cry 5 launched. They actually had to add a patch because as soon as you hit start, it began the intro cinematic, and you had no option to turn on subtitles before it started, which meant for a deaf player, they would have to watch the intro cinematic to get into gameplay, press pause, turn the subtitles on, quit, go back to the main menu, and start a new game. This happens all the time. Let people turn them on first. And you know what? I get that a lot of time people are like, but I have so much information. I just no more text. Cool. You can do sound alternatives. So this is a really old example because I just happen to love the Silent Hill franchise. How many people have played any game in Silent Hill? Cool. All right, so when you're playing in Silent Hill, especially the early ones, you know that a monster is nearby because you have a radio that makes a really annoying noise. If you can't hear the radio, you don't know there's a monster. By the time you get to Silent Hill Homecoming, as you approach a monster, there's like a creepy film grain that comes over the screen, in addition to the radio noise. So they added a cool visual effect that is creepy and part of the universe and makes everything scarier, while also now giving a way for people who are hard of hearing or deaf to know that there's a monster as well. So you don't have to shove everything into captions. Get creative. And you know what? Also just realize what is important in your gameplay. So before Fortnite brought the game to mobile, they realized that most mobile players were not playing with audio, that most mobile players were playing with it just there with no headphones. So they made several adjustments to their product before that release because they understood that people wouldn't get that information. One of the most important audio cues that people were missing were the sounds of footsteps and gunfire. And so they added that information in for the mobile release because they knew people weren't listening anyway. And just kind of talking more about auditory stuff while I'm here, you also have to think about how you're going to have players communicate if you're doing something that in multiplayer. So I used to work on Evolve. It was a game that came out about 4 years ago now, I think, maybe 3. And one of the things that we had started working on before 2K entered the project was a comm wheel. We found that there was lots of important information that people wanted to share quickly, but if they weren't able to speak or the act of stopping to type or all of that, or hearing, maybe they didn't have a mic on and they were listening, that we needed a way for players to communicate in game if they couldn't hear or if they couldn't type. So we started working on the comm wheel. Now, I was super excited when Apex launched. Who here has played Apex? Great, it's free. You should go play Apex. They introduced this ping system. So now, for both people who maybe can't quickly type, or are on console, or don't want to use a mic, or don't want to be in party chat and have muted everyone, they've introduced this amazing ping system that's contextual. So I can ping a piece of armor, and it will say, there's armor here, it'll highlight it on the map, and it'll let people know it's there. And then someone else can then ping the same thing and call dibs. It's a whole communication system that you don't even need to hear to use. Or if you're like me and don't like talking to other people in video games, you don't have to talk to them either, which is great. All right, sorry. I just word vomited at you a lot about subtitles and audio things and got angry because the industry's not good at subtitles. But that's okay. We're going to move on. Controls. So controls and how people engage with your game are obviously hugely important. Let's talk about the standard controller. And I have an Xbox controller here, but this also applies to PlayStation controller and the Switch Pro controllers, all of them. The trigger buttons are the buttons that require the largest range of motion to use and require the most strength to input. In terms of gamers with disabilities, the buttons they're most frequently trying to remap are those 2 buttons. But think about it. Think about games that you play. Those buttons are also probably the most important to whatever you're doing. It's going to be aim, shoot, gas, brake. Very important controls, also the hardest button to use. Now, if you just let people remap the controls, they'll come up with creative solutions. So this is actually a really old screenshot, but I keep using it from Uncharted 2 or 3, I think, that one of my friends sent me. So he's a gamer with a disability but uses a standard controller, and he would remap the controls. And basically what he's done is moved buttons around so that he can easily get to them on the face buttons while moving things that he didn't need to necessarily use all the time to the back buttons, like reload. For a pro player, hitting reload at the right time is key, but we also know that in Uncharted, it'll automatically reload if you're out of ammo. So for this player, just being like, well, I can just have the game do it for me. Sure, it's not optimal. All I have to do is move it. But now, fire and aim, the 2 important buttons, are on the face. Now, the other thing I get a lot is just like, that's a lot of work for me to put in my game. Isn't there some sort of hardware that they can use to do that? Well, for a long time, the only real options that gamers with disabilities had for remapping on the hard side was called the Adroit controller. It's actually a great piece of technology. Able gamers partnered with evil controllers to build this box where you could do all the different plugs, and it cost $399. A Xbox One S, 1 terabyte hard drive, is $249. That meant for these gamers, if they needed to be able to remap, they literally had to spend more than the console itself to be able to play the games on the console. That's a large investment. But now everyone's like, oh my God, Tera, problem solved, Xbox Adaptive Controller. The Xbox Adaptive Controller is great. It does the same level of remapping on the hardware. You can add all sorts of different switches and inputs to it. And like, don't get me wrong, I ugly cried on a live stream when this thing came out. I was so excited. It was such a huge day for anyone in the gaming and disability community to see a heavy hitter in the game industry make a product that was sexy and part of its line and made with love. But it's not the solution. It doesn't mean you shouldn't remap games. So Ian Hamilton, who is an amazing accessibility expert, said, Zach, Xbox Adaptive Controller, means more need for accessibility rather than less, as it means more gamers with a broader range of abilities will be on the platform. So what the Adaptive Controller has done is actually brought more gamers with disabilities to the platform. We need more things. And a lot of people still don't realize that not all gamers with disabilities are going to use the Adaptive Controller. So this is my friend Randy. He is a streamer. He goes by the name of Nomad. So Randy is quadriplegic. And what you're seeing is a screenshot from Randy's stream. He actually uses a standard Xbox controller, the same controller that we use, mounted on a bracket, and he plays with his face. He's not using the Xbox Adaptive Controller. He still needs remappable controls. And the next thing I always get told is, oh my God, Tera, but the systems do it now. You can remap your controls on the Xbox and the PlayStation 4. I'm not sure about the Switch. There isn't really an equivalent on PC. That's not a solution. It's a safety net. So when you remap at the platform level, you've just broken all your in-game UI because the game doesn't know that you've changed the buttons. The game's still going to tell you to press X, although you move that to square or triangle or whatever. The cognitive load that gets added to gamers with disabilities who may already have a cognitive impairment is huge when you make them remap at the system level. But you don't have to listen to me. This is Bryce Johnson. He's an inclusive design lead at Xbox. He's super, super sweet. I love him to death. He just says, literally, the guy who made the controller, even though we offer at the console level the ability to do this remapping, it's very important we continue to ask game developers to insert remapping into the games themselves. Don't let anyone tell you don't need to do otherwise. Game remapping is the #1 requested feature by gamers with disabilities. If you're going to do one thing, do this one. And you can assist that by just having multiple control schemes. But the important thing is let users mix up the actions. So you can see in this example, I have action reload together, but on the other one, it's action and use cover together. Having those kinds of examples are what's going to give people the flexibility. And you may be like, wow, okay, I don't actually understand what you mean by game level remapping, or if you do understand, you don't know how to do it in your game, so just a quick walkthrough. So there are basically 2 approaches that you can take to button remapping. You can do fighting game style. I have a list of buttons, I have a list of actions. Let me sort it out however I want. Or if you get a game that has like a whole bunch of stuff going on with the buttons, there's the button swap method. So basically, the simple one, which is also the same that Overwatch uses, is like literally just let me move things around. You don't even have to worry about like if the user decides they want to put the same button somewhere twice or they don't use a button. That's not your problem. Don't worry about it. The people who are using this know what they're doing and will figure it out. Just literally let them change the inputs. But if you have a really complex game, maybe that doesn't work. But either way, you're going to start with let them select their control scheme, let them start filling it out. Now, if you've got a lot happening, like this is Borderlands 2, obviously not going to work as well. What are you gonna do there? Offer a number of preset control schemes. Default is 3 for me. You can do more? Cool, not a bad thing. Once you let them pick their control scheme, all you need to do is make sure, again, action reload, action use cover, kind of swap around where you have your pairings. They select which one they want, and then literally have them swap buttons. Everything that's on that button gets moved. Change everything. I'm not saying like, oh, I want to move action, but I want to leave reload. No, just everything with that button, just move it as a group. And I'm not telling you to remap your menu inputs. I'm not saying to mix up digital and analog inputs. And I'm not saying anything that violates first-party certification on any platform. I know, I have literally submitted this feature on a PlayStation, Xbox, and PC Steam title. You're fine. And if you want to go nuts, if you have more time, think about stuff from presets, joystick inversion, sensitivity, self-all, toggle aim, crouch, simpler control schemes, just get that all in. Now, if you're thinking, Tera, but I'm working on a PC title, like, I do not care, this does not affect me, you are wrong, good friends. There are a number of gamers who cannot use a keyboard and mouse to play. If you want to get gamers with disabilities to use your title, offer control with a controller, not just a keyboard and mouse. And just talking about controls, QTEs, they're a thing that happen in game. Also, sometimes a big problem for gamers with disabilities. Think about doing stuff like auto pass, options to remove timer, or a single button press versus mashing. Resident Evil 6 actually, when it launched, had the ability to turn it off, but it changed your difficulty level. And a lot of people were really mad because people just hated QTEs but liked playing at a harder difficulty level. They later patched it in so that you could play at a harder difficulty level but still not have to do QTEs. So just another example of accessibility things are great for everyone. And of course, assistive modes, auto aim, aim assist, enemy lock on. I'm not saying put this all in hard mode. Even if you just have an exploration mode, just think about it. But enough about controls. I know, Tera, geez, subtitles, all of controls. You were talking a lot about stuff. All right, I got one more hole we're gonna go deep on, and then I promise, we'll move on. Okay, colorblind friendly. Your rule is do not convey information by color alone. If the only way you know what's happening is by what color it is, that's bad. Don't. So, what are really common offenders? All of these. Charging items. Oh, it's red because it's not ready. Bloop. Now it's green. Good to use it. Cool. Unless you're red-green colorblind, then you'll never know. Door locks, team names, minimap icons, player types, you know, medic versus assault versus all of that. Another really common one. And puzzle games. Puzzle games are notorious for doing this. So, here's how we're going to walk through how we're going to do this. Example on the left. Same icon, no difference in information, just different color. Bad. Don't do that one. The one on the other side, on the right, you can see both arrows, slightly different arrows, different colors. That's good. That's good. If that was on grayscale, you'd still know which was which. All right? Hopefully that helped. Now, this is, again, adding this and updating your title can be more useful. So when I worked on Evolve, we had a ping system originally that was just red and green. One of the things I pitched was like, hey, instead of red and green, so green for things that probably wouldn't kill you and red for things that might kill you, I pitched like, what if we had all these icons that are more informational? They all have their own colors and their own shapes and their own icons. And you know what you're pinging now. So by making our game colorblind friendly, we did more. Also things to think about, just how, not just your UI, but things happening in the world. In Evolve, we had a lot of green stuff, and we kept using a lot of red effects, kept getting lost in the map. And we later ended up patching this as well. The reason I have this screenshot up here is I want to call out the only things that have changed in this screenshot are the offending issues. You can see the glove is still the same color, the ground is still the same color. Only thing has changed is the footprints and the orbital reticle, because those are having issues with the environment. Only change what's an issue. Don't do what Overwatch did. This is a real screenshot from Overwatch with a colorblind mode. Basically, rather than just fixing the troublesome colors, they put an overlay over everything, which did make the troublesome colors a different color, but now made previous colors that were troublesome, and also really ugly. Gamers who were colorblind didn't want to use it. It actively made it worse. So if you're working on a game, Don't do some full screen filter thinking it'll fix it. No, no one will like it, and people will hate you probably. You'll at least get some mean tweets, I don't know. Just kind of more things to touch on, think about difficulty levels. This is actually one of my favorite things. So as a game designer, you do not have a dial that says easy, medium, hard that you're cranking to change your difficulty, right? You're playing with a lot of stuff. Maybe you're playing with the amount of time someone has, the number of enemies that are available, how much health they have, how much ammo the player has, all of those things. If you expose that information to the player and let them create their own difficulty level, they will be able to play. There's a designer at the BBC, same as Jamie Knight, who gave this quote once of, difficulty is the level of frustration I will deal with before quitting your game, right? That is what difficulty is. So if you let people adjust to the frustrations they're okay with dealing with, it'll be great. So this game is called Way of the Pacifist. It was made by an indie team of only like 4 or 5 people, but they actually let you, pretty much anything they could adjust, they just exposed to the player. And what was really cool is they gave each one its own fun name, so people could compare like, oh, I was Way of the Eternal Resilient Warrior. And you know what? Other games do this as well. So Tomb Raider is a great example of AAA accessibility right now. They exposed 3 different things that you could adjust instead of it being one group. So combat difficulty, puzzle difficulty, and exploration difficulty were all things that the players could adjust individually, rather than assuming because a player wasn't good at combat, they wouldn't be good at puzzles, or because a player, hated trying to explore but was good at combat, they didn't assume everyone would be in the same bucket everywhere. They let you adjust them independently. And by doing this, you're going to allow people to find that right level of frustration that they like. Oh yeah, this other one, Resident Evil 2, because I keep talking about Resident Evil 2, you should get it. They just released 3 free DLCs, and they actually have a mode in the DLC where they give you a bunch more stuff so that you can learn the map and try again and kind of get further than you normally would with the normal restrictions, so you can learn. It's almost like a training mode. You can fully beat it there if you want. Your score doesn't go on the leaderboard, but it's just like another way that you can let people test stuff. Now, the other thing that I want to share, and we're about ready for Q&A, so I want to make sure I get to that, is if you guys work on accessibility features, you have to tell people. If people don't know it's there, they're not going to use it. We made one at Evolve when we did our update. Tomb Raider did a great one. Tell people about the work you're doing. Gamers with disabilities will try products they know have these features. If you don't have it listed anywhere, they won't know that they might be able to play your product. For a lot of gamers with disabilities, they don't know if they can play a product until they drop $60, play it, and then find out they can't. That's it. And think about all your abilities. You have a website, do a live stream, make it announce, make it a marketing beat. I mean, that's what Tomb Raider did. And the community response will be great. One of the things that's actually happened with Evolve that we've seen carry on is that we actually have our gamers who are not disabled, who now know about accessibility, advocating for accessibility features in other products, because gamers want other people to be able to play. Gamers want more gamers. And now they understand this is the way how. Now, there is more you can do. I'm just going to tell you to go to read up. There's some great things you can go do. Able Gamers has includification, gameaccessibilityguidelines.com, the IGDA Game Accessibility SIG, all great resources. I mentioned GA Conf earlier. Literally all of our videos from all 3 of our conferences are online. You can watch all of them. We have talks that are, I am a one-man indie developer, and this is how I put game accessibility in my game, to AAA developers talking about what they did in your title. You'll find something. But if you've already started, don't worry. Like I said, there are a bunch of resources out there, and I kind of compiled them together and made a report card. Basically, it looks at features, and it's got a point scale for basic, medium, or major, which is like a cross between the reach that feature will get versus the cost of development for that feature, and tiers them. You can go, you can evaluate your product, what you're working on already. Here's the Google link. You'll get a scorecard, and then you'll be able to see high-value items that maybe you're missing so you can make a plan to improve your product. And once you make a plan, you can get started. Even just saying you know that you need to improve is a great first step. All right, and now it's time for some questions. I believe you can walk up to either mic, is that?
Yeah, if you're gonna walk up to the mic.
This one's on.
Hi, I was wondering if there's a particular community of people who live with disabilities who are game testers that those of us who are developing games can reach out to make sure that these, before we put into beta testing, fit their needs.
Yeah, so there are two great groups that I recommend. So the first is if you reach out to Able Gamers, they have something called player panels, which is basically you give them some information about your title and they will connect you with gamers with disabilities who can help you out there. There is also the accessible streaming community, Accessible Gamer, and they actually have a huge Discord that's full of people. I really like working with those guys because what they'll actually do, well, it obviously depends on your title if you want to be public, but if you want, they'll even do a live stream version of it so you can see it in real time. Obviously not every product with announcements you can do that, but they're another great option, and they also have like a really diverse group of people they can pull from. Yeah, no problem. What else do we got? Yeah, come on up. I was like, come on, I just word vomited at you guys for like 40 minutes. Please ask me some questions.
I was really excited to hear some of your stories about the synergies found from features that were put in the game, like the contextual pinging and the parents playing with their children and so forth. I feel like that's a really undersold part of the opportunities here. Can you talk more about what the industry is doing or what they should be doing to be able to explore that so that they get that upward spiral of benefits for everybody?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we really tout with inclusive design is sort of that fact. All of the little icons and people we have are just examples of, people who, and there's so many more. My favorite is actually like a Viking, and the thing's supposed to be that person has an accent. I don't know why Vikings mean accent, but it's true. One of the things that ends up happening when we try to sell it is, so for example, I did a huge talk at GDC a couple years ago about all of the accessibility stuff we did for Evolve. And the number one feedback I got was, well, that's just good design. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So it's really hard to get people to connect the dots sometimes because so much of what we advocate in the accessibility space is also just good design. I think one of the best things you can do to try to sell it, and I've gotten the most success in, is actually partnering with user research groups, and not just doing testing with gamers with disabilities, but putting those same types of features in front of non-disabled players and seeing their engagement as well. And so then you kind of have some hard data on like, hey, look, not only did we literally open the market over here for these people who couldn't play before, we are now getting really positive feedback from this second group about the feature as well. So user research in terms of accessibility are like your buddies, and anytime you can partner with them, it's great.
That's good info, thank you.
Thank you.
Figure I get in line.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome.
Because I was wondering, I know they have some mouse controls that are developed for people with tremors, because I have tremors to some degree and it doesn't impact my gaming much. But is that possible to use in a gaming situation? I know most of the time it's used for work, but just controls specifically created for people with different issues.
So it really depends on the particular product if it'll work with a game or not. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on how the game is reading the input from the mouse or the third-party software attached to the mouse, depending on how it's reducing the tremors and that sort of stuff. It's the same in that like some games are work really well with eye tracking and eye mice, but others because they won't let you overlay a virtual keyboard on top of the game, or it won't let you do like a nice windowed mode so you can have them both up. All of a sudden, if you are using your eye tracking software, you can't. So it really varies per game and per software that you're using it. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of time is third-party assistive tech with games gets caught in like anti-cheat filters. So it's one of those things that like, just think about that if you're working on a game and you're trying to prevent cheating in your game. You know, think about finding some of them, adding them to your whitelist of approved third-party devices, or if, you know, that sort of thing. So sorry I don't have like a great answer. Sometimes, kind of, maybe.
I didn't know how to phrase my question. Thank you.
Hi there. I have a particular accessibility question. For some personal background, I have degenerate eyes. Someday I'm going to go completely blind. And I was wondering, for people who are going heavily blind or maybe completely blind, what are some accessibility options that we can add to games, since they're pretty much a very heavy visual medium to begin with?
Yeah, so one of the first things that you can do is, if you're on Xbox or PC, you're making a title that works with them, the Xbox actually lets you do a lot of things in regards to working with the native screen reader on the Xbox. The Xbox does have a screen reader on it, not a lot of people know it, where you can pass it strings and it'll render the audio for you. Normally a lot of the big areas are menus, like there's no option to hear menus as you're going through. In gameplay, it really depends on the game. So for example, fighting games are really popular in the blind gaming community because it's 2D and every hit, attack, step has a sound that changes based on if you hit, if you whiffed, if you're moving left, if you're moving right, and it gives that context. Kind of 3D spaces can be harder, but with good, just normal good sound design, it can actually be really useful. So for example, GTA 5, not a fully blind accessible game, I'm not saying it is, but because it has such spatial audio, people were able to walk into a building and tell kind of where they were, and if they'd enter a room or left a room because of the spatial audio in the scene. For other things, just think about if you're adding ping noises to kind of figure out where it is. A game that was accidentally blind accessible was actually Resident Evil 5 and 6. So what you have in Resident Evil 5 is the ability to lock onto your co-player, and if you press forward, you'll just walk towards them. And so I actually have a friend who is fully blind who would play with his fiance. They would play together, and if he got lost, she would go stand where he needed to go, and then he could just lock on and walk towards her. So it really does depend on the game, so I'm sorry I don't have like a very specific answer for you, but I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I kind of have a personal question too. So I have cerebral palsy on my right side. I was wondering, and I don't play a lot of video games, so I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, but I was wondering if it's ever been thought of, or it's even a possibility, if they've like switched the like like the X, circle, triangle, square to the left side, because even when I remap the controls, my thumb is just slower to hit. So I was wondering if there's ever been any conversation.
Yeah, so there are some games that do just allow you to do that flipping of D-pad and face buttons.
Okay.
There have been some specialty controller made for exactly that, but that's why I advocate for remappable controls. If you can change where the buttons are, you can move the buttons that are most important to a place that's easiest for you to use.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. So I'm out of time. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to be around. I have some business cards with me, and I'll like stand around awkwardly in the hall for a few minutes in case anyone had a question that they didn't get to ask me. Thank you.